The air hung thick with the metallic tang of crimson. It coated everything: the pristine white carpet, the expensive mahogany desk, even the framed family photo I had so carefully placed. He stood over me, his face a mask of cold indifference, the document clutched in his hand like a victory flag. That was the moment I knew the life I thought I had, the family I cherished, was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion, ready to shatter into a million painful pieces. They had played me. They had used me, and they thought they had won. If you do anything to protect your sister, subscribe now. My name is Sophia, and until recently I believed in the unwavering bond of family. My brother Mark had always been my rock, the dependable older sibling I could turn to for anything. When my husband, David, passed away unexpectedly, leaving me a young, grieving widow with a 12-year-old son, Ethan, Mark stepped up without hesitation. He helped me navigate the legal complexities, managed the finances, and became a constant presence in Ethan's life, filling the void left by his father. He was, or so I thought, the epitome of a loving, supportive brother. Ethan adored him. He saw Mark as a father figure, a mentor, someone to look up to. That's why when Mark surprised Ethan with a brand new MacBook Pro for his 12th birthday, I was touched by his generosity. It seemed like such a thoughtful gift, a sign of his genuine affection for my son. Ethan was overjoyed. He couldn't wait to explore all the features, to learn to code, to create, to connect. He spent hours poring over the sleek machine, his face lit with excitement. I was grateful to Mark for bringing such joy into Ethan's life during a difficult time. The trouble started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Ethan became withdrawn, secretive. He spent even more time locked in his room, glued to the screen of his new laptop. When I asked him what he was doing, he'd shrug and mumble something about homework or online games. I chalked it up to typical preteen behavior, the natural inclination towards privacy and independence. But then I started noticing things: hushed phone calls, furtive glances, a growing unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. One evening, I walked into Ethan's room unannounced to ask him about dinner, and he slammed the laptop shut with a speed that startled me. He stammered, his face flushed, and insisted that he was just finishing up a school project. I tried to brush it off, to reassure myself that I was being overly protective, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, I found myself drawn to his room. The laptop sat innocently on his desk, the Apple logo gleaming in the dim light. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The screen flickered to life, revealing a chat window filled with messages, a language I didn't understand. Jargon, code. But one phrase jumped out at me, a phrase I recognized with a sickening jolt: Project Nightingale. I had heard Mark use that term before, in hushed conversations on the phone, always followed by a nervous laugh and a quick change of subject when I entered the room. My heart began to pound in my chest as I scrolled through the messages, piecing together fragments of conversations, unraveling a web of deceit that threatened to consume everything I held dear. They were talking about the company, about taking it over, about making sure I wouldn't be a problem. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Mark wasn't helping me, he was using Ethan. He was using my son as a pawn in some elaborate game, manipulating him through the allure of technology, exploiting his innocence for his own nefarious purposes. The generosity, the support, the constant presence, it was all a facade, a calculated strategy to gain my trust, to lull me into a false sense of security while he plotted against me. The pain was unbearable. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, a betrayal so profound that it shattered my perception of reality. How could my own brother do this to me, to my son? The person I trusted most was one of them. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on me with the weight of Mark's betrayal. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by endless nights of tossing and turning, replaying the chat logs in my mind, each message a fresh wound. How could I confront him? How could I protect Ethan without revealing what I knew, without exposing my son to the ugly truth about his beloved uncle? I tried to talk to Mark, to probe his intentions without directly accusing him, but he deflected my questions with practiced ease, his eyes gleaming with a chilling mixture of amusement and contempt. He asked if I was feeling all right, suggesting I was still grieving, still not myself, subtly painting me as unstable, unreliable. It was psychological warfare, a slow, insidious campaign to undermine my sanity and isolate me from those who might see through his charade. Ethan, oblivious to the storm raging around him, continued to idolize Mark, spending hours working on Project Nightingale, eagerly sharing his progress with his uncle, who would shower him with praise and encouragement. I watched them, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, knowing that with each passing day, Ethan was being drawn deeper into Mark's web of deceit. I attempted to limit Ethan's screen time, to steer him away from the laptop, but he resisted, his newfound passion fueled by Mark's constant attention and the promise of exciting new opportunities. He accused me of not trusting him, of stifling his creativity, of treating him like a child. My efforts to protect him were backfiring, pushing him further into Mark's grasp. The pressure mounted. I felt like I was drowning, struggling to keep my head above water while Mark systematically dismantled my life, piece by piece. The company, the one David and I had built from the ground up, the legacy I was determined to preserve for Ethan, was now under threat. Mark, using Ethan's access to the company's systems through Project Nightingale, was siphoning off sensitive information, manipulating financial data, and secretly maneuvering to seize control. I started noticing discrepancies in the accounts, subtle anomalies that raised red flags, but whenever I questioned Mark, he dismissed my concerns with a patronizing smile, attributing the irregularities to accounting errors or market fluctuations. He was always one step ahead, covering his tracks, anticipating my moves. I tried to confide in my friends, to seek their advice and support, but Mark had already poisoned the well, subtly planting seeds of doubt about my mental state, suggesting that I was paranoid and irrational. They listened to my concerns with polite skepticism, their eyes reflecting a mixture of pity and unease. I could see that they didn't believe me, that they thought I was losing my grip on reality. I was alone. Utterly alone. One evening, I decided to confront Mark directly. I waited for him at his apartment, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. When he arrived, he seemed surprised to see me, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. I laid out my evidence, the chat logs, the financial discrepancies, the growing list of anomalies that pointed to his betrayal. He listened in silence, his face impassive, betraying no emotion. When I finished, he let out a low chuckle, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. He didn't deny anything. Instead, he calmly explained his plan, his voice dripping with arrogance and contempt. He had always resented David, he said, resented his success, his happiness, his perfect family. And after David's passing, he saw an opportunity to take everything that David had, to seize control of the company, to claim the life that he believed should have been his. He had manipulated me, he confessed, exploited my grief, used my son as a pawn in his twisted game. He saw me as weak, vulnerable, easily manipulated. He thought I would simply crumble under the weight of his betrayal. He underestimated me. He went on to explain the Project Nightingale concept in detail. It was a sophisticated piece of software designed to exploit vulnerabilities in the company's security systems, allowing him to access confidential data, manipulate financial records, and ultimately seize control of the entire operation. Ethan, unknowingly, was the key. Mark had been grooming him for months, nurturing his interest in technology, subtly guiding him towards the Project Nightingale software, convincing him that it was a harmless game, a fun way to learn coding. He never suspected that his uncle was using him, that he was being manipulated into betraying his own mother. As Mark spoke, a cold fury began to simmer inside me. The pain, the betrayal, the helplessness, it all coalesced into a burning rage that threatened to consume me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make him pay for what he had done, but I knew that I couldn't. I had to remain calm, to think clearly, to devise a plan to protect Ethan and expose Mark's treachery. I excused myself, feigning a need to collect my thoughts, and left his apartment, my mind racing, my heart filled with a burning desire for revenge. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken me, but he was wrong. The game had just begun. The drive home was a blur of flashing lights and distorted sounds. I barely registered the other cars on the road, the street signs, the familiar landmarks that usually grounded me. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, disbelief, anger, fear, and a crushing sense of despair. I replayed Mark's confession over and over in my head, each word a fresh stab wound. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted him so completely? He wasn't just trying to take the company, he was trying to destroy my life, to erase everything that David and I had built together. And he was using Ethan, my sweet, innocent son, as his weapon of choice. I pulled into the driveway, the headlights illuminating the empty swing set in the backyard, a stark reminder of the life David and I had envisioned for our family. A life that Mark was now trying to steal. I stumbled out of the car, my legs feeling like lead, and made my way inside. The house felt cold and empty, devoid of the warmth and laughter that usually filled its rooms. Ethan was asleep, his door slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. I stood there for a moment, watching him breathe, his face serene and untroubled. He looked so much like David with his dark hair and bright, inquisitive eyes. The thought of Mark's betrayal poisoning Ethan's innocence ignited a fresh wave of fury within me. I would not let him win. I would not let him destroy my son. I went to my bedroom and locked the door. I needed to think, I needed to plan, but my mind was racing, consumed by a vortex of negative thoughts. I felt trapped, helpless, like a puppet dangling from Mark's strings. He had anticipated my every move, manipulated my emotions, and isolated me from everyone who might have helped. I was alone, vulnerable, and seemingly outmatched. I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face, and allowed myself to wallow in despair. I thought about David, about the dreams we had shared, about the life that had been so cruelly taken from him. I wondered what he would do if he were here, how he would protect Ethan from Mark's treachery. I felt like I had failed him, that I had failed my son. I closed my eyes and an image flashed through my mind, David's smiling face, his strong arms wrapped around Ethan, his voice filled with love and encouragement. He was always so strong, so resilient, so full of hope. And then I remembered something he used to say to me whenever I faced a challenge. "You're stronger than you think, Sophia. You can handle anything life throws your way." His words echoed in my mind, a lifeline in the sea of despair. I took a deep breath and slowly stood up. He was right. I was stronger than I thought. I had survived David's passing. I had raised Ethan on my own. I had built a successful company. I had overcome countless obstacles in my life, and I would survive this too. I would not let Mark break me. I would not let him destroy my family. I would fight back. I spent the rest of the night poring over documents, financial records, and chat logs, searching for any shred of evidence that could expose Mark's treachery. I felt like a detective, piecing together fragments of information, unraveling a complex web of deceit. I discovered that Mark had been systematically transferring funds from the company's accounts to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, using shell corporations to conceal his activities. He had also been manipulating the company's stock price, driving it down in order to buy up shares at a discounted rate. His plan was elaborate, meticulous, and ruthlessly efficient. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated my resolve. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had a plan. It was risky, audacious, and potentially dangerous. But it was the only way to protect Ethan and expose Mark's crimes. I would play him at his own game. I would use his arrogance against him. I would make him believe that he had won, that I was still the weak, vulnerable woman he thought I was. And then, when he least expected it, I would strike. The day they betrayed me was the day revenge was born. I smiled. I played their game, but I was recording everything. The first step was gathering irrefutable evidence, evidence that couldn't be dismissed as paranoia or grief-induced delusion. I needed concrete proof of Mark's illegal activities, proof that would stand up in court and expose him to the world. I started by covertly installing surveillance cameras throughout my house, disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a bookshelf speaker, a digital clock. I positioned them strategically to capture Mark's interactions with Ethan, his phone calls, his computer activity, anything that could shed light on his scheme. It felt invasive, violating my own privacy, but I knew it was necessary. I also hired a private investigator, a former law enforcement officer named Sarah, to delve into Mark's financial affairs. Sarah was discreet, professional, and incredibly resourceful. She had a network of contacts that could access information that was otherwise hidden from public view. Within days, she uncovered a complex web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and fraudulent transactions that confirmed my suspicions about Mark's embezzlement. The evidence was mounting, but I needed more. I needed to understand the full extent of Project Nightingale, to uncover the vulnerabilities in the company's security systems that Mark was exploiting. That's when I turned to an old friend from college. A cybersecurity expert named Ben was a genius when it came to computers, a master of code, a digital Houdini who could break into any system, no matter how secure. I explained the situation to him, carefully omitting the details about Ethan's involvement, and asked for his help in analyzing the Project Nightingale software. He agreed without hesitation, his eyes gleaming with excitement at the challenge. He worked tirelessly for weeks, dissecting the code, tracing its origins, and identifying its weaknesses. He discovered that Project Nightingale was designed not only to steal data and manipulate finances, but also to create a backdoor into the company's systems, allowing Mark to control every aspect of the operation remotely. It was a sophisticated piece of malware, cleverly disguised as a legitimate software update, and it had the potential to cripple the entire company if left unchecked. Ben helped me develop a counter-program, a digital vaccine that would neutralize Project Nightingale and seal the security breaches. It was a race against time. I knew that Mark was planning to make his move soon, to seize control of the company at the next board meeting. I had to be ready. The days leading up to the board meeting were filled with tension and anxiety. I continued to play the role of the grieving widow, appearing weak and vulnerable, while secretly gathering my forces and preparing for the final showdown. Mark, confident in his impending victory, became increasingly arrogant and careless. He would often brag about his plans in front of me, assuming that I was too distraught to understand what he was saying. I would simply nod and smile, feigning ignorance, while mentally recording every word. He was walking right into my trap. Ethan, still oblivious to the truth, continued to work on Project Nightingale, diligently following Mark's instructions. I tried to talk to him, to warn him about Mark's true nature, but he refused to listen, blinded by his admiration for his uncle. I knew that I had to protect him, to shield him from the fallout of Mark's treachery, but I also knew that I couldn't tell him the truth until I had exposed Mark's crimes. It was a delicate balancing act, a constant struggle to maintain my composure and prevent Ethan from getting hurt. One evening, as I was reviewing the surveillance footage, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Mark was on the phone, talking to someone in hushed tones, discussing the details of his plan to seize control of the company. He mentioned a name I recognized, Richard Harding, the company's chief legal counsel. Richard was a trusted advisor, a close friend of David's, a man I had always considered to be an ally. But now, it seemed, he was working with Mark, betraying David's legacy and helping him to steal the company. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't trust anyone. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. I spent Thursday night reviewing my plan, double-checking my evidence, and preparing myself mentally for the confrontation. I knew that it would be a difficult day, emotionally and physically. I would be facing my own brother, a man who had betrayed me in the most profound way imaginable. I would be exposing his crimes to the world, shattering his reputation, and potentially sending him to prison. But I also knew that it was the right thing to do. I had to protect Ethan, to protect David's legacy, to protect the company from Mark's greed and ambition. As I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I thought about David. I imagined him standing beside me, offering his support, his strength, his unwavering belief in me. I knew that he would be proud of me for fighting back, for refusing to be a victim. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, asking for his guidance, his courage, his protection. And then I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of justice, of revenge, of a future free from Mark's treachery. Their biggest weakness. They thought they were untouchable. That evening, sifting through countless lines of code, Ben called, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and horror. He discovered the kill switch, a hidden piece of code within Project Nightingale designed to not just steal data, but to utterly obliterate the company's entire digital infrastructure, wiping out years of research, client information, everything. The audacity was breathtaking. But even more chilling, he found a subroutine linked to Ethan's user profile, a failsafe that would trigger if anyone tried to disable the main program, effectively framing Ethan as the mastermind behind the entire operation. Mark wasn't just stealing the company, he was setting my son up to take the fall, ensuring Ethan's future would be ruined, his life forever tainted by his uncle's treachery. My vision tunneled. The air seemed to thin. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. I thanked Ben, my voice a strained whisper, and ended the call. The pieces were finally in place. Mark's overconfidence, his meticulous planning, his willingness to sacrifice his own nephew, it was all going to be his undoing. The trap was set. I spent the next few hours meticulously preparing for the board meeting, going over every detail, anticipating every possible scenario. I contacted Sarah, the private investigator, and briefed her on the latest developments, instructing her to have a team of investigators ready to move in and apprehend Mark and Richard as soon as I gave the signal. I also reached out to a journalist, a respected investigative reporter named Emily, whom I had met at a charity event a few years ago. I trusted Emily's integrity and knew that she would handle the story with sensitivity and professionalism. I provided her with a detailed summary of Mark's crimes and promised to provide her with irrefutable evidence at the board meeting. I knew that exposing Mark's treachery to the media would be a risky move, but it was necessary to ensure that he was held accountable for his actions. I wanted the world to see him for who he truly was, a greedy, ruthless, and manipulative sociopath. As the night wore on, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear and anxiety had dissipated, replaced by a steely resolve. I was ready. The morning of the board meeting dawned gray and overcast, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress that conveyed both strength and mourning. I wanted to project an image of quiet dignity, of a woman who had suffered a great loss but was not broken. I arrived at the company headquarters early, before anyone else, and made my way to the boardroom. The room was cold and sterile, the long mahogany table gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I took a seat at the head of the table, David's old chair, and closed my eyes for a moment, imagining him beside me, offering his support. I could almost hear his voice, whispering in my ear, "You've got this, Sophia, I believe in you." I took a deep breath and opened my eyes. It was time. One by one, the board members began to arrive, their faces etched with concern and curiosity. Mark entered the room last, his expression smug and self-assured. He caught my eye and gave me a patronizing smile, as if to say, "It's all over, Sophia, you've lost." I simply returned his gaze, my face impassive, betraying no emotion. Richard Harding, the chief legal counsel, stood beside him, his face pale and nervous. I knew that he was aware of what was about to happen, that he was bracing himself for the storm. The meeting began, and the usual formalities were observed. Financial reports were presented, strategic plans were discussed, and minutes from the previous meeting were approved. Mark sat quietly, biding his time, waiting for the opportune moment to make his move. I could feel his eyes on me, watching, assessing, anticipating my reaction. He thought he had me figured out, that I was still the grief-stricken widow he had manipulated for so long. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Mark stood up, his voice confident and commanding. He announced that he had uncovered some disturbing financial irregularities within the company, irregularities that suggested a pattern of mismanagement and potential embezzlement. He proposed an independent audit of the company's finances, led by a team of forensic accountants of his choosing. It was a blatant power grab, a thinly veiled attempt to seize control of the company and solidify his position. The other board members looked at me expectantly, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath and stood up, my voice calm and steady. "Thank you, Mark, for bringing these concerns to our attention," I said. "I agree that it is important to address any potential financial irregularities and ensure the integrity of our company." I paused, allowing my words to sink in. "However," I continued, my voice hardening, "I believe that we should also investigate the source of these irregularities to determine who is responsible for creating them." I looked directly at Mark, my eyes burning with righteous anger, and I believe that I know exactly who that is. The color drained from Mark's face. He knew that the game was up. "What are you talking about, Sophia?" he stammered, his voice trembling. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Mark," I replied, my voice dripping with venom. "I'm talking about your elaborate scheme to embezzle millions of dollars from the company, to manipulate the stock price, and to seize control of the entire operation." I paused again, allowing the weight of my words to fill the room. "I'm talking about Project Nightingale." A collective gasp swept through the room. All eyes turned to Mark, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. He stood there, frozen in place, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before their eyes. Just then my phone buzzed, a text from Ben. It was time. I looked directly at Ethan, who sat at the far end of the table, his face a mask of confusion and concern. "Ethan," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I need you to run a diagnostic scan on Project Nightingale. There's something wrong with the system, and I need you to fix it." Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing nervously at Mark. But then he nodded, his expression determined, and reached for his laptop. He typed in a few commands and the screen flickered to life, displaying the familiar lines of code. As Ethan worked, I turned back to Mark, my eyes blazing with fury. "It's over, Mark," I said. "Your little game is finished." He lunged. A desperate, pathetic attempt to silence me, to stop the inevitable. But Sarah's team was faster. Two plainclothes officers moved with astonishing speed, intercepting Mark before he could reach me, pinning him against the wall. He struggled, his face contorted with rage and disbelief, but their grip was unyielding. "You can't do this," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I'm a member of this board, I have rights." Richard Harding, his face ashen, tried to intervene, but another officer stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Stand down, Richard," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You're only making things worse for yourself." Ethan, meanwhile, had completed the diagnostic scan. His eyes widened in horror as he saw the results. "Mom," he stammered, his voice trembling, "Project Nightingale. It's not what Uncle Mark said it was. It's a virus, a backdoor into the entire system." Tears welled up in his eyes. "He was going to frame me, wasn't he? He was going to make me take the fall." I nodded, my heart aching for my son. "He was, Ethan, but it's over now. You're safe." I turned back to the board members who were staring at Mark with a mixture of shock and disgust. "I have here," I said, holding up a flash drive, "irrefutable evidence of Mark's crimes. Financial records, emails, phone recordings, everything, it's all there." I handed the flash drive to one of the board members, a woman named Elizabeth, whom I trusted implicitly. "Please, Elizabeth, review the evidence and share it with the rest of the board." Elizabeth nodded and plugged the flash drive into her laptop. The room fell silent as the board members began to examine the evidence. Their faces grew darker and angrier as they scrolled through the documents, listening to the recordings and watching the videos. It was a comprehensive indictment of Mark's treachery, a damning portrait of a man consumed by greed and ambition. After what seemed like an eternity, Elizabeth looked up, her eyes filled with fury. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "Mark, how could you do this? How could you betray David's trust, betray this company, betray your own family?" The other board members echoed her sentiments, their voices rising in a chorus of condemnation. Mark stood there, defeated and humiliated, his dreams of power and wealth shattered before his eyes. The police escorted him and Richard away, their faces grim. The following days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media coverage, and corporate restructuring. Mark was charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Richard Harding, his accomplice, faced similar charges. The company's stock price plummeted, but with careful management and a renewed commitment to ethical practices, it slowly began to recover. Ethan was exonerated, his name cleared of any wrongdoing. He was devastated by his uncle's betrayal, but he was also relieved to know the truth. He threw himself into his work, determined to help rebuild the company and honor his father's legacy. As for me, I stepped down as CEO, feeling that I had accomplished what I set out to do. I wanted to focus on my family, to heal from the pain and betrayal, and to start a new chapter in my life. The news coverage was intense. Emily, the journalist I contacted, published a series of articles detailing Mark's crimes, exposing his treachery to the world. The public outcry was deafening. Mark's reputation was destroyed, his name forever associated with greed, corruption, and betrayal. He lost everything: his wealth, his power, his status, and his family. Even his friends abandoned him. He was a pariah, shunned by society, forced to live with the consequences of his actions. I watched it all unfold, my heart filled with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I had achieved my revenge, but it had come at a great cost. The experience had changed me, hardened me, and left me with a deep sense of distrust. But it had also taught me the importance of resilience, of courage, and of fighting for what is right. Years later, I live a quiet life, surrounded by my family and close friends. Ethan is thriving, a successful businessman with a strong moral compass. He has a family of his own now, and I am a proud grandmother. Mark is still in prison, serving a long sentence for his crimes. I haven't spoken to him since that day in the boardroom. I don't know if he regrets what he did, or if he even understands the magnitude of his betrayal. But I do know that he will never be able to hurt me or my family again. I often think about David, about his kindness, his generosity, and his unwavering love. I miss him every day, but I know that he would be proud of me for what I did. I protected his legacy, I protected his company, and I protected his son. And in the end, that's all that really matters. They lost everything, I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.